I want to begin by thanking Anya and Ivona for inviting me to present today to honor Doctors Patricia Krantz and Lynn McClanahan, and for offering me this opportunity to present with my esteemed colleagues today. It was my great pleasure to be trained by Doctors Krantz and McClanahan and to work under their tutelage for more than 30 years. In a recent conversation I had with a junior colleague at PCDI, he described Pat and Lynn as icons in the field of autism intervention. Iconic is an accurate description of their contributions to applied behavior analysis because of the extensive and pervasive replication of their work around the world. Their contributions to the field of autism intervention, which included research in areas such as language development, staff training, and the systematic replication of program models, represent some of the best examples of science-based intervention for this population, not to mention the introduction of new and innovative concepts such as systems analysis. Of course, their publication and research on the use of activity schedules to diminish or eliminate the reliance of people with autism on prompts delivered by other people may be considered one of their most important contributions. In 1983, PCDI opened its second community-based group home for children with autism. The 5 youngsters who resided in this home were typical of individuals diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. They had varying levels of expressive and receptive language, displayed a common array of problem behavior, including aggression and self-injury, and engaged in multiple topographies of both verbal and motor stereotypy. Although some of the children had acquired elementary self-care, play, and home living repertoires, these response chains were seldom, if ever, emitted unless they were verbally prompted by a caregiver. As we described in our 2001 publication, prompt dependence may be best defined as behavior that is controlled by some irrelevant aspect of the student's environment. As you are aware, the behavior of people with autism is often under the stimulus control of the verbal or manual prompts delivered by an instructor, or perhaps by the presence of the instructor, him or herself. Numerous studies, like that completed by Hugoven and his colleagues, caution that the prompts used by instructors to evoke responses from learners with autism may prevent these children, adolescents, and adults from attending to the aspects of the environment that should ultimately control their behavior. For example, if you are teaching an adolescent with autism to brush his teeth using a photographic activity schedule, then instructors must ensure that the photographs included in the schedule come to control toothbrushing versus having the manual prompts used to produce individual responses or the presence of the instructor control that set of behavior. The failure of schedules following skills to generalize to home, to the community, and most importantly, to the absence of the instructor is likely to be closely linked to the manner in which schedule following behavior is taught and the aspects of the environment that come to control these skills when they are displayed. As stated here, any stimulus that is present at the moment a reinforcing stimulus is delivered can potentially come to acquire control of that response. The most common reason that schedule following skills are not acquired or do not maintain and generalize is the result of the continued pairing of reinforcement with other stimuli, like the presence of supervising adults. Our daily clinical practice makes this evident, as we see instructors use socially mediated motivational systems to reward schedule following behavior, to see them provide high levels of praise statements before learners have learned to complete response chains without prompts, and or to use verbal error correction procedures when teaching people with autism to complete activity schedules. These clinical observations are supported by our existing research. Many behavior analysts have stated that as the contingencies of reinforcement exert their influence over behavior, the stimuli that are associated with those contingencies will acquire discriminative properties. In a paper by Dunlop and Plennis, we are told that stimulus control is often acquired by instructors who use reinforcement systems to modify behavior. The results of this study also demonstrated that learners' behavior that had been exposed to high levels of reinforcement in the presence of the instructor differed when the teacher was absent. Who among us has not witnessed this level of differential responding in the presence versus the absence of supervising adults? Put simply, learners with autism must come to attend to aspects of their learning environments that have been designed to ultimately control their behavior. Clearly, these must be stimuli that will not be fated. Based on this definition, activity schedules are criterion related because they will continue to be present in the environment after graduated guidance and the instructor's presence have been fated. If learners' attention to the activity schedule is not maximized, and if schedule following behavior is continually reinforced in the presence of stimuli like the presence of the instructor, then prompt dependence may be a foregone conclusion. So what can we do to ensure that schedule following behavior does come under relevant stimulus control? Perhaps one of the most important yet overlooked aspects of our 1993 study on activity schedules was our decision to embed rewards into the activity schedule itself. This strategy was important because it not only prevented the continuous pairing of the instructor with the delivery of rewards, but was also critical in establishing the activity schedule as a discriminative stimulus. The activity schedule became a salient aspect of each boy's environment because it was the activity schedule and not the presence of a supervising adult that signaled the probability of reinforcement and controlled their access to reinforcers. As the use of activity schedules became more prevalent following our research, it became more common practice to use teacher-controlled or socially mediated motivational systems, usually token economies, to reinforce schedule-following behavior. An unfortunate side effect of this practice is that teacher-managed motivational systems emphasize the importance of the instructor's presence. When the instructor is present, reinforcement is likely to occur. In the absence of the instructor, the probability of reinforcement is zero. This slide lists several strategies that might be used to prevent the instructor from becoming the stimulus that controls schedule following behavior. Each of these strategies are in tune with Pat and Lynn's emphasis on reducing prompt dependence and creating environments in which the level of ongoing supervision might be reduced. The first strategy is consistent with the procedures used in our 1993 study and embeds photographs or text in the activity schedule that cues the learner to access reinforcing stimuli. The second strategy involves making the presence or absence of supervision unpredictable to the learner. And finally, self-management systems can be used to increase the independent performance of people with autism by teaching them to self-monitor their behavior and to manipulate their own motivational systems. Although time does not permit a detailed summary of all of the research conducted at PCDI that relates to the use of these strategies, allow me to present some examples. The study cited here used embedded rewards and a self-managed motivational system to teach adolescents with autism to complete an activity schedule in the absence of direct supervision. The variables listed here are likely familiar to people who have used or taught activity schedules. The schedules were written, tokens were embedded within the pages of the schedule, and graduated guidance was used to teach schedule following behavior. Although the three participating boys had extensive histories of schedule following behavior, the baseline measures reveal that schedule following behavior was virtually absent during baseline. The fact that the boys did not respond to the presence of familiar materials in phase 1, the schedule in phase 2, or the instructor's presence in phase 3 suggests a high level of prompt dependence. Tokens were embedded within the pages of the schedule to prevent pairing the presence of the instructor with the delivery of reinforcement, and learners were taught to remove the tokens and place them on a token board as they appeared in the schedule. In addition to an embedded token economy, the intervention package used during the teaching phase of this study, was identical to our 1993 study, and that described by McClanahan and Krantz in their books on activity schedules. The instructor used graduated guidance delivered from behind to produce schedule following behavior, spatially faded those manual prompts, then faded her proximity until she was outside the room. An exception to the intervention was the inclusion of an error correction procedure that was limited to occasions when the learner engaged in off-task behavior for more than 5 seconds. When the error correction procedure was deemed necessary, it's important that we used graduated guidance, that we required at least one schedule following response, and that we emphasized the learner returning to the written or photographic stimuli with each response that they completed within the schedule. It's also important to note that we placed, It's also important to note that we place limitations on the use of error correction because error correction procedures too can emphasize the importance of the schedule of the instructor. Once the instructor had been faded outside the room, she was prohibited from returning to the room under any circumstance. So once she was out and the door was closed, she was not allowed to return. The next strategy I'd like to review briefly involves marking the onset and the offset of supervision unpredictable. When we find that the presence of another person has come to signal the likelihood of reinforcement, it may be advisable to make the supervision of the parent or the instructable less predictable. 3 boys with autism participated in this study, and all had had extensive experience with activity schedules. Each also displayed high levels of off-task behavior when the instructor was absent. Both on-task and on-schedule behavior were measured during this study, and teaching schedule completion again included graduated guidance, spatial fading, and ultimately the removal of the instructor from the learning environment. When 80% of the intervals were scored for both on-task and on-schedule behavior for 2 consecutive sessions, we began to fade the presence of the instructor. This slide lists the steps that we used to fade the presence of the instructor. So you can see that at the beginning of fading, the instructor was in the room, shadowing or following the learners at a distance of less than 5 inches. We then gradually expanded the distance between the instructor and the student, moving to 6 inches, 12 inches, moving the instructor approximately 2 feet across the room where she was standing by the door. Then she was standing in the doorway with the door just partially open. And then ultimately she moved outside of the room, but was returning on a previously determined schedule of time where she would re-enter the room, spend about 2 seconds, 3 seconds in the room, and then depart again. This shows the schedule that we use to make her return less predictable. She is now outside of the room, but she's now returning every minute on the minute mark. Again, remaining approximately 2 seconds. If people are engaged, she simply turns and leaves the room. We then move that to 2 minutes, then to 3 minutes. At the 4th step, you see us begin to make the supervision less predictable. She's now coming back randomly every 2 to 5 minutes, then every 3 to 5 minutes, and then ultimately she's not coming back but once during the entire session. The final study used self-managed motivational systems and self-monitoring procedures to teach 3 adults with autism to wrap silverware in a napkin for use in a restaurant. They were also taught to deliver their own tokens. When they had acquired 10 tokens, the men learned to make their own exchange in the absence of the instructor, to reset their motivational system, and to return to work. And they did this for 60 minutes. Each of the men displayed high levels of on-task and on-schedule behavior at the conclusion of the study. They acquired self-monitoring skills to track their own work performance, and they learned to self-deliver their own rewards, thus eliminating the need for the instructor to be present. Oops. We're going to skip ahead here because I'm just about done. The success of these studies is directly paired with the precise and systematic use of the procedures described in the research by Krantz and McClanahan for the acquisition and generalization of schedule following behavior. That is to say, the schedule was emphasized as the most salient aspect of the environment, and prompts were applied and faded in a systematic fashion. Instructors remained behind participant at all times and never came between learners and their assigned materials. This included error correction procedures that were based on graduated guidance and drew learners' attention back to the activity schedule. Finally, rewards were not mediated by the instructor, but were either embedded or self-managed by learners, thus removing another variable identified by Krantz and McClanahan as detrimental to increasing levels of independence. Activity schedules are and can be a useful means of producing the independent completion of a wide array of activities and responses when they are systematically implemented and when caregivers attend to the relevant aspects of stimulus control addressed in this presentation. Thank you for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the symposium. Thank you.